I've still got a box in the attic. I think it's from an old air conditioner, but that's just about full of game consoles, controllers, joysticks, a zapper, a tangled octopus of wires and adapters, and several Sega Genesis and Nintendo tapes. I always hated when kids would call them tapes. I'm not sure why I keep them, I haven't played them in a while, but it seems a shame to just throw them away. Maybe I'll give them all to a niece or nephew, or perhaps a friend's children. Maybe. Not all of them, though. The last time I played any 8-bit games on a physical console, I mostly play emulators lately. It was a few years ago. I'm 28 now, living with my boyfriend of 4 years. He plays a lot of Xbox and PlayStation, Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, stuff like that, and he teases me for not playing anything newer than N64. Also for being a Nintendo fangirl, since I'm so unfamiliar with titles on the PlayStation, Dreamcast, Xbox, let alone the Atari, which I never even owned. I don't know, I just can't get into more recent games, and I grew up with Nintendo. Maybe I'm just being nostalgic. I remember the last NES cartridge I played was the original Metroid. I always liked that game, even though I was never really great at it. It was a huge maze, and I would just get lost or carried away exploring. I've seen our brother beat it before, and I beat Super Metroid. But on the original, I most likely, just spent time wandering around the labyrinth hallways and corridors. It was interesting, if not very stellar graphics. It had great sound for such an old game as well. And if you're only familiar with the new 3D Metroid titles, you should totally check it out. But anyways, like I said, Metroid was the last NES cart I played before I put the system into storage. I was playing alone as my boyfriend had to work that afternoon. He had dropped me off back at our apartment, having driven me to and from a medical procedure that had been performed under general anesthesia. He could only get the morning off from work, but that was fine as I was pretty out of it from the sleeping gas. I only planned to lie around and be a lump anyways. Tired as I was after getting home from the clinic, I really didn't feel like sleeping for, fear I'd be awake all night. So I shambled from the sofa, squatted in front of the TV, popped the oddly shaped hunk of gray plastic into the front of my Nintendo, a sizably larger, oddly shaped, hunk of gray plastic, and turned the console on. The game started up nicely as usual. I pride myself on keeping my games in their black vinyl sleeves and original boxes. I pressed the start button and began a new game quickly. Before too much of the opening theme could play, the music used to give me, the creeps, which I suppose was the intended purpose, and as a fully grown adult, I'm not ashamed to say that it still does. I watched Samus materialize as her iconic fanfare played, and then began my adventure on planet Zebeth, or Zebes, depending on, which game you're playing, whatever. Anyone who has played a hard copy of Metroid probably won't be surprised to read the game was experiencing, some graphical glitches. It's pretty typical and probably gets worse as the circuit board ages. In any case, I didn't find it odd that some of the color palettes were sporadically abnormal. Sprites were a little shaky or pixely, or that floor and wall blocks were incorrect. I made my way through the first area of the game called Brinstar, which has pretty kick-ass music, making Samus run and jump and shoot her arm cannon at all the planet's indigenous creatures, many of which hadn't done anything to warrant being blasted to bits, but hey, that's the name of the game. As I continued exploring the halls and cavern collecting items, I did know that the game seemed to be glitching out more than usual, just graphically though. The sound was fine, and the game was running quite smoothly. There was a notebook next to me on the sofa where I was sitting, and I decided that I would attempt to make notes as I played through the game. Still being half sedated, I wanted to make sure I didn't get too lost or unknowingly retread my steps. I scribbled out some rudimentary maps as I played, making notes of, about items that I'd found. Soon I would also begin making notes on the screen, of on-screen glitches that would appear, as I had never seen the game be quite this screwy before, and wasn't sure if I would even see it again. It is from these sketches and notes that a friend of mine recreated the screenshots that accompany this text. By the way, speaking out of tone here, if you're looking at the screen, I'm basically putting up screenshots. These are doctored screenshots as stated in the creepypasta, and they're not from the in-game or whatever an emulator that the person is playing. Just pointing that one out there. Anyways, back to the creepypasta part 2, Kraid. After a bit of exploring and item gathering, I made the decision to go to the first mini-boss hideout, where Kraid lives. Something that I found out, sort of freaky, was that the room containing the elevator to Kraid's lair, the far wall has a menacing-looking gargoyle statue. However, when I had gotten to the room, its lower jaw was reversed, like, it was facing the wrong way. Also, I was pretty sure that the statue normally had color in its eyes, but it just had black, empty sockets. It was actually a bit unnerving, especially coupled with the music playing. It's the same tune that plays in the rooms containing Samus's upgrades. Basically some dissonant beeps and blips, just, I don't know, creepy. So I'm wandering through the hideout, trying to track down as many upgrades and power-ups as I can without accidentally going to fight Kraid before I'm ready to. As I don't exactly know my way around, I managed to get an energy tank after finding a tunnel in the wall of a room. I remember feeling stupidly proud of myself at this point. It must have been quite a sight. sitting in the dark in grungy gray sweatpants, Afghan wrapped, in my shorts, grinning stupidly at an increasingly glitched out NES game. By this time, the game was seriously screwing up, though, like in ways that I'd never seen before. Some of the enemies were starting to, stretch out and look almost melty, if that's a word. At this point, I found it more strange than creepy. I was honestly more concerned that the glitches were going to culminate in the game freezing before I got a password or anything. It was oddly playing fairly well for someone who, not 2 hours prior, had been dead to the world under anesthesia. I really didn't want the game, or the Nintendo to crap out while I was on a roll like this. With bated breath, I continued through the corridors, grabbing some more missiles, while trying to avoid falling into the acid beneath me. Blasting through red doors, I begin finding my way down towards the boss battle room. Eventually, though, I did find a spot to replenish my energy and missiles just before trying to battle Kraid. Once I fell, I was beefed up, enough to take on the boss. I went in, started pumping missiles into that hapless turtle, alligator, dragon, discount Bowser thing. After I landed a few hits and took a little damage, Kraid's sprite began to pixel and fuzz out. I was getting pissed thinking my game was going to freeze, but it just kept going. I nailed the boss a few more times and his face kept looking more and more effed up, until he flashed a few times and then his sprite turned red? Like it got stuck on some alternate color palette. This is something I'd never seen. I mean, I've seen some of the enemies flash and turn different colors, yes, but I've never heard of it happening to the mini-bosses. Regardless, I continued to bomb and missile the crap out of my enemy. Suddenly the sprite changed, its screen froze up, and the weapon get jingle played. It was again afraid, I was afraid that the game would stop working, but it continued, and things got weirder. The red Kraid didn't blow up like normal. Instead, the sprite appeared to be stuck in place, crudely holding its own head. It was at this point I began to wonder if the after effects of the anesthetics were causing me to hallucinate or something. I only got put under the surgery once before that, when my wisdom teeth was pulled out, and I don't remember having any actual visual hallucinations after that. I paused the game and hobbled over to the bathroom to pee. Afterwards, I splashed some cold water on my face to help me wake up and stay alert so I could keep playing this increasingly glitchy game. Back to being a couch potato, I looked over some of the notes I took. I added a few about the Kraid battle so I didn't forget about it. It was time to send my bounty huntress into the fires of Norfair. It was around this point in the game that I used to, start having trouble as a kid. I would tend to get lost and wind up dying a bunch, but I was hoping that my apps and notes would, note-taking would allow me to get further than I, used to. I backtracked through Kraid's hideout without getting lost and found my way to Norfair. For several minutes the game seemed to be behaving. That is, the graphical glitches were gone. I felt a bit of relief about this. I spent some time gathering power-ups in Brinstar before heading down to the bubbly subterranean caverns. I managed to get the Varia suit in my travels, giving me some more confidence, knowing I'd need all the help I could get in Norfair. And down the elevator I went. I noticed at this point that the graphics started going haywire again. I tried to make note of as many odd glitches as I could while attempting not to get my ass handed to me by space critters and lava, sitting mohawk dungeon thingies, those things or whatever. If you've played the game, you know what I'm talking about. It was getting harder to concentrate on the screen, though. There were some horizontal lines flashing on and off, as well as nondescript shapes flickering. I kept falling into the lava, but I was able to keep my health up until I got the screw attack, which was a godsend. However, after I shot the orb containing the screw attack upgrade, the S-sprite was flickering between the correct image. And what I'm sure was like the upper half of Samus's torso, but it was the Justin Bailey cheat Samus, without the power suit. That coupled again with the upgrade room music got me once more feeling a little unnerved. Playing Metroid alone without the lights on is creepy enough when it's running smoothly. Behind the lion curtains, the lazy autumn sun had taken its early leave, and I was playing in the dark, but I was too groggy to get up and turn a light on. Also, at this point, I was worried that if I, were to get up and jiggle the controller wire at all, the NES might freeze. So I played on collecting power-ups in Norfair on the way to Ridley's hideout. Things were seeming easier than the screw attack and the ice beam, and I was still wandering around a lot, trying to find the hidden passages I needed to navigate in order to locate all the upgrades I was going to require. The game's graphical glitches were becoming more and more bizarre. Lots of the bubble and egg or ovum tiles were becoming common where they shouldn't have been. And the color palettes were looking increasingly organic, resembling living tissue more than I'd remembered. It was a slow go through the rest of the lava-filled landscape, and the droning music made my trek seem to be take even more longer than it was. I finally made it to the elevator, which descends to Ridley's lair. The elevator room was especially glitched up and mismatched tiles and colors. What I didn't expect to see and don't remember ever seeing before was a large bubble tile containing what seemed to be a purplish tadpole-type creature. The tile was also crudely animated, something else I don't remember actually ever seeing before in the game. Also, when I pushed down over onto the elevator shaft, Samus appeared to crouch down for several seconds before the platform began to descend. I was later told that the crouching Samus sprite was actually used in the game, but not when operating an elevator. Down in the second mini-boss hideout, the level of glitching escalated. I was actually quite proud of myself for playing as well as I was coping with the disadvantages of being woozy. And playing a game with mildly compromised graphics, however some of the glitches did allow me to see hidden passages I couldn't morph ball through. At one point, some of the enemy sprites began to get that melty look again and would blow up with 1 or 2 hits, even though I was still using the ice beam. I was going through a room looking for power-ups when I saw something especially unexpected. It was a Kraid sprite, the discolored one that appears in the first hideout before you get to the real Kraid. It has a weird brown and light blue color scheme. The sprite also seemed to have one of the tadpole bubble things around its midsection. It almost looked like it was holding it against its body. I armed my missiles, but that fake Kraid was just kind of frozen there, and it wasn't posing any threat. Also, I felt that for whatever reason, it just didn't seem right to kill it. The colors in the hideouts were more messed up than any of the other areas. I remember making a note of a specific area where the discolored tiles, with the curved spikes hanging down, like in the boss battle rooms. The tiles had formed a little enclosed area, and within that space was a Metroid. Even I knew that the Metroids didn't start showing up until you went into the area right before Mother Brain. The Metroids were flickering and jittering violently in this little prison, but I could tell that there was something else odd about it. Like, the colors weren't exactly right, but there was something more than that. It looked like it had been one of those tadpole things, or something similar within it. It honestly disturbed me quite a bit. I continued to make my way through Ridley, less concerned now with finding all the power-ups I could. I just wanted to get out of the boss hideout and Norfair. So I rushed through the remaining caverns till I got to the room containing Ridley. Surprisingly, the room wasn't very glitchy at first. I distinctly remember that the lava was replaced with the hanging bubble things from Norfair, though. Inverted so they were pointing up. As I pumped missiles into Ridley, predictably, the graphics began to flicker and glitch. It made it more difficult to battle the dragon-esque monster, who I remember my brother beating relatively easily. Just like Kraid before him, the more I damaged the mini-boss, the more strange the sprite became. His neck kind of stretched out from his body, and his wings were detaching and mirroring very quickly. He kept jumping up and down as his head glitched out, until I stabilized it, upside down for its normal positioning. His erratic hopping continued as I fought him, but after several shots with my missiles, he stopped hurling fireballs. He was no longer attacking. I kept shooting at him, but I felt almost badly about it, like I did with the fake Kraid. I know it sounds stupid, but it felt almost like he had, given up? I eventually did defeat him, and his sprite exploded like normal, except usually when you kill something in the game, the sprite divides and blows up into little bits that disappear. But the chunks into which Ridley exploded didn't disappear or fall off the screen. They just landed on the platform and stayed there. Not violently or anything, but it was just strange to actually see the bits of carcass left behind. It made the death seem more real, or at least less insequential. I obtained my missiles from winning the fight, and proceeded to find my way back out of the hospital. I got through the level fairly easily with the help of my crudely drawn maps, and I felt relieved at the thought of being out of there when I found the elevator back up. But when I began to ascend, the game surprised me once more. It froze midway up the elevator, and the screen flickered in such a way that I couldn't adjust my eyes correctly. But I know that I once again saw the Justin Bailey Samus where it shouldn't have been. The sprite was many times its normal size, appeared to be wider, fatter than usual, and on top of that it didn't seem to be wearing any clothes, I'm pretty sure I don't remember that when I used to watch my brother play. It only flashed on the screen for a few seconds, so I'm only telling of what I saw, or I thought I saw. So after the elevator incident, I was really wondering if I was seeing things. Maybe the doctors gave me some anesthesia I never had before. That would at least explain the weird shit that I keep seeing while playing the game. I was feeling pretty bad, but I really wanted to see if I could beat Metroid for the first time, and I was really close. I followed my maps back up to Brinstar, regaining health and missiles where I could. I hadn't stopped at the statue room after beating Kraid, which is optional I guess, so I didn't see if it was screwed up back then, or if it was newly glitched up, but boy oh boy, was it something to see. Firstly, there were Metroids stuck in the walls and lava tiles, and they appeared to be in pain or seizing. When I shot the Kraid and Ridley statues, the path across the lava seemed to be made of random tiles, and the most upsetting of it all, the statues themselves were flashing and misshapen. The Ridley statue especially appeared to really screwed up. It looked as though its mouth was agape, and its eyes were red. I morph ball through in great haste. The area before Mother Brain, called Terrain in Super Metroid, was a pretty big mess of bad tiles and messed up colors. I was doing my best to just freeze the Metroids that appeared so as to save my missiles for the boss room. I remember seeing one of the elevator room gargoyles faces upside down in the floor at one point, along with some of the tube graphics from Mother Brain Hall. Also, the Metroid seemed to contain those little life forms like before. They were more of like this human flesh color than the ones in the bubble tiles from earlier. I ran as fast as I could through the increasingly buggy corridors and escaped without getting killed by Metroids. I was finally at the final boss stage before outrunning the bomb to escape. The game seemed to be getting more and more effed up as I further, progressed. And I was glad it was getting over soon. First of all, the music in Mother Brain's room is really nerve-wracking. It's not spooky or creepy like some of the other music in game, but it's really dissonant and intense, probably on purpose to make you nervous and screw up. I tried my best to just freeze the flame rings that came in all directions and avoid damage from the turrets. It's just a cluster of enemy fire, and dealing with the wayward pixels and flickering images were making it rather difficult to keep them from taking damage. I was able to blast through the test tube looking things that protect the last boss, Zebetites, I think they are called, and eventually get to the final screen containing Mother Brain. Having never fought her before, I had no strategy and just tried to hurl as many missiles into her as I could. I took a fair amount of damage but didn't die at any point, which kind of surprised me. Like the other boss fights, the screen seemed to degrade into shapes, lines, colors, and pixels as I inflicted damage on their giant red organ. I was just about out of missiles, and when Mother Brain took out her last hit, the screen began to flash, and the Mother Brain sprite broke away in blocks. I was excited, but I knew that I'd still have to escape the level before the whole place exploded. However, when the text popped up to tell me that the bomb was set, and I had to get out before the timer reached 000, it was completely butchered. The music didn't change, and the time didn't count down. Instead, there appeared to be this airlock in the wall. Not sure what to do, I shot and passed through. So I'd never seen this part of the game before. I ran through a corridor surrounded by blackness like earlier in the game. There was no discernible music, just the sounds of the airlocks and Samus's footsteps. I ran through and opened the next airlock. Another corridor followed, this one in graphically worse shape than the previous one. There were floating enemies in the blackness, and some random lava tiles in this room in the next. The following corridor had a broken area in the ceiling, but there must have been some invisible wall since I couldn't jump through it. Yet another floating hallway. I was wondering what exactly was going on in the game. As I could tell, this wasn't supposed to happen. The hall was walled with bubble tiles, and they were dark pink. I guess they were rock tiles floating, but they kind of reminded me of ground meat. The next corridor was more of the same, except some of the floor and ceiling tiles were colored pink, or light lavender, making me think of intestines or veins or something like that. The airlock was also a fleshy pink hue. The following corridor would be the last in this line, where the blackness had been in the other hallways. The screen was entirely full of the dark meat tiles. I would later joke with myself about this being Metroid, but at the moment I was too creeped to think of humor. I shot the next pink airlock and went through. The door opened directly into a deep chasm, lined with the red tiles and gargoyle faces. The pit was also filled with missile power-ups, some of which were flashing or glitching. I was able to pick up quite a few. There were sporadic platforms and ledges that I was able to land on, but I wasn't able to jump back up the pitfall from any of them, so I just continued my descent into darkness. I eventually fell onto the floor made of the inner-looking tiles with a fleshy airlock door in the ground. I bombed the door and dropped through the airlock. I came out on the other side in what appeared to be a copy of the Mother Brain room. However, there was no flame rings or fireball turrets assailing me, and the intense music was replaced with the upgrade elevator room music, which almost gave me goosebumps. The Zebetites were different, lighter in color, and more notably, they seemed to contain one of what I had thought of as a tadpole creatures being in a different color and in space where I could get a longer look at them. They appeared to look distinctively more like unborn babies, human fetuses. I was feeling cold and my skin was clammy, like how you feel when you have a bad fever, not knowing what exactly to do. I fired a missile at the pinkish test tube. The tube shattered and the fetal creature fell out and disappeared through the floor. Doing this made my heart skip a beat. I jumped through the gap and saw another Zebetite. I really didn't want to, but I fired at it. First with my ice beam and did nothing. I tried to jump through or around it, thinking that the game's glitches might allow me to pass this part, but had no luck. Eventually I shot a missile at it. It blew apart like the other one. Feeling strangely guilty and dirty, I fired at the last incubating creature and saw that there was another Mother Brain at the end of this room. As I said, there were no enemies or projectiles in this area. I just stood across from the other brain. Its color scheme was different, not the orangey, bright red of the first Mother Brain. This one had more of a graying pink tone to it. As I pulsed, I fired a couple missiles, hoping this would end the game quickly. Each shot made the screen flash and the glitches worsen. and as I shot the large brain, it pulsed violently and began to degenerate. After 2 missiles hit the screen, it was a mess of mismatched colors and tiles, and this other brain appeared to ooze blood and fluid from wounds I was inflicting. It also seemed to have liquid, tears flowing from its eyes. I felt awful for this creature, but still wanted to get the game over with as soon as I could. I fired one more of the missiles and the large brain faded away in blocks like the original mother brain, revealing another flesh airlock behind it. The airlock led into an upgrade room, with a color palette that I didn't recognize from the rest of the game. They were normally gray or blue, but this was crimson and bluish gray. Strangely, this area seemed as though I had no graphical glitching at all going on. The statue on the ledge was not holding an orb on its claws, but instead one of the bubble egg tiles from Norfair. I jumped up and shot the ovum, revealing what I can only describe as follows. It seemed to be a child, a newly born baby surrounded by this flashing aura. The baby was dripping with pinkish fluid. I could only venture to guess it was placenta or amniotic fluid. The last one flashed for several seconds, and then the screen went black. When the TV lighted up again, it showed a deranged version of what I remember to be on the screen displayed when you beat the game. It had the normal space background, but the planet's surface was the color and texture of living tissue or ground meat. There was a floating Metroid with what looked like the newborn from the previous screen inside it. There was a large sideways head depicting Samus without her helmet with black ooze from her eye sockets. In the center of the screen, where one normally sees Samus waving to the player in her power suit or bikini, was an image of what I assume was Samus, with her arm grotesquely stretched and her leg displaced. The image of Samus was also fully nude, and tenderly holding her hand to her belly, appearing to be pregnant. The text that appears gets explaining that they have saved the galaxy was also glitched, and it just read, "You will be their mother." I gazed at this for several moments as the opening title theme played before the game froze, and the sound glitched. The screen went black and the NES seemed to reset itself. The normal title screen was replaced by a strange and bastardized version of itself. The mountainous landscape was replaced with the inner-looking tiles. There was a large fetus sprite in the upper half of the screen, and the text that normally read Metroid now read Mother. After several moments, the Mother text flashed in strobed colors, freezing on a screen in which the letters instead read Y, before restarting and repeating this disturbing imagery. I slowly heaved myself to my feet, shuffled over and shut off the system, extinguishing the last of the light in the room. Feeling freaked out and generally unhappy about what I just experienced, I laid on the couch and let the sleep I had been so fervently battling take me away. My boyfriend came home around 11 and kissed me, asking if I wanted to come to bed. I said no, that I would just spend the rest of the night on the sofa. I didn't tell him what I'd been through, or thought I'd been through, but he said when he woke me up, it looked like I had been crying. I still don't know what exactly I saw happen or not. I'd like to think it was just some sort of hallucination. I put the Nintendo and the games away, and like I said, mostly play emulators now. Haven't really wanted to play Metroid since then, if you can imagine that. One other thing is, the reason I was groggy that day, had been under anesthesia, been to the clinic about 2 months prior to the event. I noticed that my period was late, not just a day or two, more like a week, and when it did come, I was just spotting. I'd been late before, but this time I was becoming concerned. I bought a home pregnancy kit, tested positive, twice. Following that, I went to my doctor and was tested properly. It turned out that I was with a child, only in the very early stages of pregnancy. I wasn't sick or showing it at all. After a day or so, I told my boyfriend. I could tell he was shocked, or at least unnerved. I'd been on birth control, and although we were exclusive with one another, he often used condoms. We were always careful. I guess not careful enough. We'd been together long enough that the topics of marriage or children had come up a few times. We both decided that neither of us were mature enough nor financially stable to support any children at all in our current point in life. After a long discussion, we decided that neither of us were at a point in our lives where we thought we could give enough of our attention to raising a newborn child. We were barely bringing in enough money to support ourselves on our own. Maybe we could have struggled through with a child, but neither of us had savings, nor were our jobs actual careers by any means. We weighed our options, and after some long discussions made our decisions. We called the closest branch of Planned Parenthood, talked over everything, and made an appointment to come in. All the events I described before, the strange occurrences or hallucinations I experienced while playing my copy of Metroid, it all took place on the day of my appointment. That day I was there, at the clinic, having the pregnancy terminated.